Interview with John Adams on ASIC, the most dysfunctional agency in Australia. Coming up on this episode of Citizens Insight. Welcome to Citizens Insight, the Citizens Party's interview series on matters of national and international significance. And my guest today, backed by popular demand, is independent economist John Adams. Welcome, John.
Hi, Robbie. How you going?
Good. Welcome to Victoria. Danistan. You feel comfortable being here?
Crossing the border yesterday, I had a run-in with the Victorian police, but we're here to talk about...
That's because I tipped them off.
Well, we're here to talk about a different police force today.
That's true. Anyway, well, it's good to see you here again. Last time you appeared on Citizens Insight, John, we discussed ASIC, because at that time you had just produced your bombshell report.
Yeah.
That I think ASIC has come up with different adjectives for. On its dysfunctional investigation and enforcement procedure. And since then, a hell of a lot has happened.
That's right.
Namely, you've got up an inquiry. We helped you. We're just in the phone room there, catching up with people. The phone team helped make a lot of calls into Parliament to get that to happen. Mm-hmm. So we've got an inquiry, but that was back in October and November last year. It's now July. So let's catch up. Just give us a broad brushstrokes. How have things gone in the last 8 months?
Well, the thing is, why don't I take it back about 18 months? Just so we give your viewers and members some context. This whole journey with ASIC started when I get a tip-off about a systemic corporate fraud scheme happening across Australia. And initially I was very sceptical about such claims because in our network we hear conspiracy theories all the time. Yep. But this conspiracy theory caught my imagination.
Which shouldn't be dismissed, they've got to be verified, and that's what you tried to do.
Yes. So I thought to myself, well, I'm an economist, I'm not law enforcement, I'm not a lawyer. But I had a particular interest in this conspiracy theory, so I thought, well, let me start investigating and putting the evidence together as I tried to understand it. Went to a lawyer in Sydney and with a file of evidence, my first file, and I said, well, I want you to read this, I'll pay you, and I want you to tell me whether there's something in this from a legal point of view and what do I do? Yeah. And the answer was, there's potentially something here, but more work needs to be done, more evidence needs to be collected, but the appropriate agency, given the case theory, is ASIC. And that was the first sort of entree into ASIC at that point. And it's fair to say, Robbie, that the Citizens Party has been aggressively pursuing ASIC for many, many years. And for me, the journey came from a lawyer in Sydney who said, go to the Australian Securities Investments Commission and basically from that first set of advice, we continued the journey. Yep. 9 months, $50,000 self-invested, self-funded investigation that came up with what I call the package, the 608-page file of evidence, which gives, and what we asked ASIC to do was to commence a formal investigation into a specific set of allegations that specific federal and state laws have been broken.
By a specific corporation.
Specific corporation, correct.
Yep.
And so that journey of collecting the evidence and putting the case theory together was something I've never done before. Very, very challenging. And once you try to get around your mind, Robbie, as to what is an allegation, it's for example, it's someone who did something on this day at this place with this intent. Et cetera. Particularly when it's corporate fraud and theft, you have to be very, very specific. And then the evidence has to be very, very specific to the day, to the time, to the witness, to the document, if you're doing chronologies, all that sort of stuff. So going to that level of detail was very difficult for me to put it all together. And then,
And educational, because...
Absolutely.
Can I say, you and I were talking closely during this process and you were keeping me abreast of some of this stuff. And our party, up until this point, has focused on the macro failings of ASIC, right, and all the reasons that we think it deserves criticism. But what you're efforts showed is when you've got to turn those criticisms into actual, or turn ASIC's job into actual law enforcement, where you've got to provide evidence, it's a very difficult thing to do. The bar is very, very high. And to me, this is my observation so far, it's not just, to me it reflects a problem with the law itself, the way it's written, because I don't think it should be that difficult to enforce the law, right? And I think it is too difficult.
Yeah. Well, like Robbie, I think there's two matters. Is that the court requires a specific type of evidence and specific nature of evidence to prove a crime, but before you get to the court case is the ASIC's propensity to investigate.
Yeah.
And so now, it was only until at the end of the process did I fully understand how difficult it was to get an ASIC investigation according to ASIC's own numbers. I mean, I started the journey where the lawyer says go to ASIC, and I just started because my mind is very analytical, and I didn't want to put something half baked before the government. I wanted to, if I'm going to make some serious allegations, I want to be, at least say hand on heart, I honestly believe this, and I've done the best job I can to put the allegations together and the evidence so that they're not going to think that this is this case theory, that it is completely nuts. And so that's why it was a meticulous process. But can I say this? But also, one of the things and this is where the Citizens Party helped quite a bit is we worked together on Sterling. And I got to talk to various people around the Sterling case and the Sterling inquiry that you guys led. And I learned quite a bit about ASIC. I went back and had a look at the 2014 Senate Economic References Committee inquiry into ASIC. And it was clear to me that ASIC bends to political and media pressure. And I thought to myself, well, if we go to ASIC and they fail to investigate, I need an insurance policy, i.e. the media, to pick this up if they're not willing to investigate. And what I realised is the more documentary evidence that I have, the more credible that a media organisation will likely pick it up. So there was some motivation about that thinking, but I'm glad I went through that process and it was meticulous as possible, because it was only until the end of the process did I realise the chance of getting an investigation, which according to ASIC's own annual report was less than 1%. And I thought to myself, far out. Had I been told at the beginning, would I have gone through the process and the journey? Probably. I don't know. I mean, look, it's sort of 50-50. I mean, when my wife, I'll be, honestly, when my wife realised I bet $50,000 on a less than 1% chance of ASIC investigating a set of allegations, she just thought that the bar was incredibly high, right. and was it worth the risk? But 6th of April, I'll go into ASIC's office in Sydney, unannounced, said, I'm here, under instruction from my barrister to hand in this file of evidence. And they go, did you use the portal, the online portal? And I said, well, we have 103 exhibits of evidence. This portal doesn't handle this level of material. Did you call someone in advance? I said, no, I just was told to come walk in. So I walked in that day. Someone came out within half an hour. Who was able to take receipt of the package. Within the afternoon, we had received a formal receipt from ASIC. We acknowledged this has been handed over. And then we addressed this complaint to the ASIC chairman, Joseph Longo, and we said, this is so serious, we're raising this with you because we think this is of critical importance. And so then it went through the assessment process. And so from the 6th of April to the 4th of July, it went through an assessment process. Now, I've only learned this recently because of the FOI process. There were 3 assessors. The first 2 assessors failed our report on the basis that it's not ASIC's job to investigate this particular crime, but it was the 3rd assessor who said, no, we're going to do it. And so on the 4th, on the 4th of July, the official ASIC investigation, this is Section 13 of the Act, commenced. And here we are, and that's 2022, so we are here in mid-2023, with the investigation ongoing. Now,
Hang on, you just gave me a detail there I hadn't heard before. So you had a less than 1% chance of getting an investigation up, and now we know you had 1/3 of less than 1% of a chance
That's right.
of getting an investigation up.
Yes. So there's an assessment team within ASIC called Misconduct and Breach Reporting Team.
Yeah.
Their assessment was not our job. It went to
Wow.
one of the supervision teams. Because there was a set of allegations that they had expertise on, and a senior lawyer said not our job. Then there was people in the enforcement team, the investigators, who also did their review, and they said no, we want to take this up.
And this is a recurring theme with ASIC now. We were just talking to someone here in the room about Sarah Court saying something very, there was recent quotes from Sarah Court in relation to PwC, where the whole gist of her testimony was looking for excuses as to why this is not our job. That's ASIC's MO. Look at an issue, and the first thing they're looking for is, can we get out of looking at this?
Yes, indeed. So the investigation has been going on for more than 12 months. Now, there are two, I think, important things just on this point before we get into the inquiry that I just want to highlight. The first thing is that where the Citizens Party was very critical of ASIC on Sterling is when you have vulnerable people who are at risk, ASIC should have an obligation to move quickly to protect the public.
Yep.
Now, on Sterling, they failed. It took them 14 months to start an investigation, and then the investigation was slow, and by the time the whole thing blew up, it was too late to save people's money.
Yep.
That's one thing. Now, we have examples presented to the inquiry. 20% of the submissions for the inquiry is one case study, which is Mayfair 101, and the guy that's been in the gun in the private sector in ASIC's sites is a guy called James Malwini.
And that's the opposite problem, right?
Here's the thing. So from start of investigation to court, 7 weeks. Why? Deputy Chair Karen Chester said it was to protect the public. So what we know from the Mayfair case is when ASIC wants to move at the speed of light, it has the capacity to do so. But we also know that they can have systemic failures in terms of doing the investigation. Now,
but also, just hang on, you would say that whereas by definition all the Sterling victims were entirely unsophisticated,
yes,
the Mayfair investors that Karen Chester was supposedly protecting were not.
Correct. Yes, that they were sophisticated. So the law, Chapter 60 of the Corporations Act, talks about what does it mean to be sophisticated. Now, here's the thing: the English dictionary definition of sophisticated is your expertise. That's not how the law defines sophisticated. Sophisticated is if you have a lot of money.
Yeah.
The law assumes you are sophisticated because you have a lot of money. Now, in a property bubble, when you've got elevated property prices, if you sell a house in Melbourne, you could have $2.5 million because you sold a house, or $1 million, whatever the case may be. What the law says, because you have that amount of money, is you're sophisticated, and therefore the law doesn't afford you as much protections compared to if you are unsophisticated or you're a retail investor. Now the practical reality of finance is that some people poor could have a deep understanding of the law of finance and investments, and you can have people with a lot of money who are clueless and they are unsophisticated. So there's an issue when you talk about the law. There's an issue about how Parliament has defined these terms and whether it really is about the money and assets versus expertise, knowledge, and experience as to what is sophisticated, unsophisticated, and who should have protections under the law and who should not, and what are the obligations there. But
and let me give you another quick example of the speed of ASIC. And this is when our party first became aware of ASIC. Really, 2005, we put out an article that I wrote in our publication called The Mother of All Bubbles, and it was an article about the global derivatives bubble, and we predicted in that article that the global derivatives bubble would bring down the global financial system. And a supporter in Western Australia took that to his accountant and said, are any of my investments exposed to derivatives? His accountant took it to ASIC, and Craig Isherwood and Nolene Isherwood, the directors of our company, all got threatening letters from ASIC threatening us with penalties if we were giving financial advice without a license, purely on the basis of an article, not financial advice, just an article. That's how proactive ASIC was, protecting the property bubble and the derivatives bubble from our commentary. 3 years later, the financial system did blow up.
Yes.
Right? No one went to jail. 12 years later, we're having this conversation about ASIC and it's still the same problem. They're proactive in some areas, but where they fail people, where they truly fail to protect people, there's a massive pile of financial victims there.
Absolutely.
And that does relate to potentially your case, right? The failure to protect people.
Well, here's the thing. It depends as to whether the case theory is, whether it is correct or not. Now, for legal reasons, we can't get into, what the package is all about. But we should say, what it's about, because we've had a lengthy discussion about it.
And I saw the folder. I said to John at the time, this folder was the exception that proves the rule. It shouldn't be this hard to get an investigation to ASIC from ASIC.
Yes, and so we'll get into that in a second. But here's my two frustrations that has come up, which has been very topical, particularly with Martin North and I on YouTube. The first one is that even today I met a mainstream journalist who saw elements of the package and understands the case theory and said, but surely this is a relatively simple case to investigate. And I said, well, we don't think it's too complicated. We think it's a relatively straightforward exercise to either prove or disprove. Because here's the thing, my view is this, and I actually spoke to a high-powered lawyer from Sydney this morning, and our view is if ASIC has detected fraud, their immediate obligation is to get interim orders from the court to stop the company from trading to protect the general public. ASIC has not done that. But then on the other hand, if we are wrong, why is the investigation ongoing? So there's a mystery box here, and so
because it's been a year.
It has been 12 months.
Yep.
It has been 12 months. Now, we have heard some rumblings on the grapevine that ASIC has supposedly found something. I can't elaborate more than that. And my frustration is, if they have found something consistent with the allegations, where the hell is the urgent action to protect the public? That's what they haven't been able to explain. And then the question is, well, why? Now, controversial or not, it just so happens that the Prime Minister, Albanese, intervenes during the criminal investigation, attends a particular public event with the people who I've made allegations against, gives them a public endorsement. At the same time, there's a criminal investigation led by ASIC. Now, we did a show, Martin North and I, called The Final Secret, exposing the Australian Prime Minister. It was a controversial show because in the history of Australia, that show's never been done before. But also, I should say, we think this is an unprecedented situation with the PM's intervention, knowingly or unknowingly. ASIC has watched the show. There's an official file note about the show. It's obviously caused internal rumblings within ASIC. But also, I should say, in that show, I said that I've made a confidential submission to the inquiry, and we'll get into the inquiry in a second, about this issue of the integrity of an investigation. Now, the one thing that I can reveal to the audience is that in the last fortnight, I've received internal documents from ASIC under the Freedom of Information Act, and the ASIC inquiry has had. There was a public hearing on the 23rd of June, but on the 3rd of May there was a in-camera hearing between the inquiry and ASIC, and the top item of that agenda was my submission about the Prime Minister. So there was a number of matters raised.
Okay.
According to this document I have from ASIC, I was number one. That's what the inquiry wanted to hear about, about this issue, and so the ASIC has provided some explanation to Parliament, and that's all I could ask for of Parliament to do. And again, so Parliament has done nothing formally so far, but again, the investigation hasn't shut down. No doubt, ASIC would have told Parliament the investigation's ongoing, but where will this ultimately end up? And was I correct in my allegations or not? That's the $64 million question.
All right, I want to say something about this, and I've got an analogy. So without giving the game away, I've got an analogy that you could think of your ASIC investigation, which you achieved. You could think of it like a photo, and the Prime Minister has appeared in the background of this photo. The question is, has he photobombed it, just walking in there accidentally? or has he stood there as some kind of a message? That's the live question, right?
Well, yes.
And I've been a skeptic. In our conversations, I've been a skeptic about your interpretation of this. But recently, you had communication from the Prime Minister's office and another minister's office, which has caught my attention because it's made me slightly less of a skeptic. And so just explain what happened in those circumstances.
So I've bombarded the entire government with freedom of information requests, and given a set of public events, I've asked for internal documents within the government that led to the planning of these events. Now, the one Department of State and the minister have confirmed the event took place, and they've provided me, about 70 pages each about their internal records about this public event, which I say the Prime Minister was filmed and photographed with alleged criminals. Now, the Prime Minister's office has come back, and you've seen the letter.
Yep.
And the letter says we have no documents related to any such event because the event didn't happen. And it's like, well, how is that even possible? Now, we're recording here on Tuesday, Robbie. We're recording on Monday. The one thing I can tell you is that Thursday this week will be a landmark day. And the reason why is that the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet is going to respond to my FOI request, and we will see what the PM's department says. Did it happen? And do they provide me documents, or do they have the same position of the Prime Minister's office that it didn't happen? Because this would be, quite. But putting the politics aside, to have one department saying something happened factually, another department says no, it did not happen. I mean that would be a scandal within the public service.
Yeah, using my photo analogy, one department said, yeah, that's him there. And the other one goes, no, that's not him. That's not, you're seeing things.
Yes.
He's in the photo. We've seen him in the photo.
Yes.
I can attest to that. I have assumed there are extenuating circumstances, but now that there's been a denial that he's even there, I'm like, okay, what's going on here?
Absolutely. And now again, maybe it was an innocent mistake or whatever the case may be. But like I said in the show with Martin, the tax office has pursued these people for many years related to illegal activity, tax fraud, and a whole bunch of other things, and that's all on the public record. So, I've spoken to a former leader of the opposition about this situation, and he said the test in Parliament is, did he know, or should he have known? And my proposition is that on the tax matter, the Prime Minister should have known, his office should have known, because it's on the public record. Now, if your argument is the ASIC inquiry or the ASIC investigation was not revealed to him prior to the events, well, then we can get into that conversation. But the tax thing is undeniable. That I think it's a gross breach of the ministerial standards for the Prime Minister to be appearing with someone who is before the court on tax fraud matters. So that's that issue, and we're going to see how that plays out. But the good thing about this process is, one thing is I have shown, and this is where the Citizens Party may have an issue, is I have shown that the system can work. In terms of getting an investigation, the system can work of actually trying to see if we can put bad people away, and we'll see where we end up. But then obviously the question is, your retort will be but at what effort?
It shouldn't be this hard.
And at what cost? And that's what I said to you in February of last year, when I'm spending 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, preparing the final draft of this, and I'm frustrated because it's so tedious. There's so much material to go through. Because even those 608 pages, we had hundreds of other pages which we didn't submit to ASIC because it wasn't relevant to the final cut of what we were going to put forward. And I just kept on thinking, well, at that time, our third child was born. We had a lot of things happening with the family. My wife needed me to do other things, but I needed to stay focused to get this done. I'm thinking to myself, well, surely it shouldn't have to be this hard in order to get the government to do their job, which is, and again, the way I describe ASIC to my daughter is they are the financial police, they are the money police. So you've got police doing different things, but when it comes to financial crime, this is the agency, and whether we like it or not, ASIC is here to stay, and we need to make sure that ASIC is effective so that the general public, so we don't want another Sterling, we don't want another Mayfair, we don't want another whatever, and you know, there's a number of case studies before the inquiry which are very shocking examples of just absolutely screwing up their job. And some of it's just like, you know, I mean, I've put in 3 submissions to the inquiry. One of them is about a case before the court at the moment, where an ASIC investigator is cross-examined by a silk, and he was forensically examined about his investigation methodology, completely someone very young, someone very inexperienced. ASIC didn't have a proper supervision over this employee, and this was a criminal case. ASIC was trying, and the DPP were trying to put someone in jail, and the whole case was destroyed by just asking some very logical questions about what did you do in your investigation, and you could see by his responses it was a completely shambolic investigation, should never have been able to go to court. There were so many holes in it, and it was just outrageous. But again, because one of the things I've learned in the process of the FOI request that I've done is in September of last year, when ASIC got wind that I'm writing an independent report. So we've done the investigation, the package, we've got investigation. I then go to work about actually taking ASIC's data, putting it in an Excel spreadsheet, and developing a series of graphs about the rate of no further action, which is the NFA, which is one of your favourite things. Looking at the rate of responding to whistleblower disclosures, the number of new investigations per year, and you can see ASIC's numbers saying that there's a declining trend. Even though they have more money, more staff, the numbers are going in the opposite direction. Now, I remember the first time I came up with some of these graphs and I emailed them, and you were you were quite surprised. Why is this happening? And I thought, well, I don't know why it's happening, but it's happening. And so that's why I did a draft. ASIC got wind that I was preparing this, and the internal communications in September of last year that I've been able to receive through FOI is they couldn't understand my motivation, because initially the ASIC Chief of Staff Louise McCauley in an email said, is he upset with us because we've rejected his package?
Yeah.
And the answer was, no, we haven't rejected, we actually are investigating. So if we're doing what he wants, what's
his problem?
Precisely, what's his problem? And the problem is that while I have the resources and the ability, even though this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do, you know, I think about my mother.
Yeah.
Could my mother do this? Not a chance in a million years. And then obviously a lot of your supporters, Sterling victims and others, can you forensically put the evidence together? And again, this package was not just saying, okay, for example, Joe Smith is a crook. It is these 15 laws are broken. These people did these specific things, and this is the evidence that justifies these specific things have been done, and these specific things are why the law has been broken. Because for a law to be broken, typically you have to meet 2 or 3 tests of the law. There's various elements. So you've got to basically map this out to say that, it's kind of like Cluedo. Robbie Barwick in the kitchen with the knife on this day, this time, he stabbed John Adams. You've got to be that specific, and you said, but then you've got to say by virtue of using a knife on John Adams died. I mean, that's the level of detail, and this is where I think a lot of financial victims don't understand.
They wouldn't have a clue
about what the court requires in terms of a very specific, legally articulated allegation. That's the level of detail you've got to go through. So when I went through this process, and fun enough, I had a team that was helping me, and I was paying them. And then I met some people who used to work at ASIC during the course of the Sterling inquiry, and realised that these people actually know what they're doing. And so I switched the teams, and then these people were able to help me take the evidence and put it together. And I thought to myself, if I could do it, but this is really, really hard for me, and I think I'm capable, it's near impossible to get access to financial justice. And so, again, you're motivated by the public interest, I'm motivated in terms of the public interest. And if ASIC is gone, what is this problem? The problem is the general public cannot get an investigation into something serious. And we saw that on the 29th of August last year, the Wolf of Woy Woy, the full corner story is, you had a guy called Daniel Flett from New South Wales, a whistleblower, through his lawyers, go to ASIC and says that this company has stolen investors' money, and ASIC wouldn't even do anything about it. And for the record, I've spoken to Mr. Flett, And he's because I wanted to understand what he went through, and he said I paid lawyers to draft up a specific statement to say, as the chief financial officer, this is what happened. The lawyers submitted it formally to ASIC, and they wouldn't investigate. And so now this Wolf of Wall thing will come up in the course of the inquiry. But I thought to myself, if the trend at ASIC's data is saying it's gone down the toilet, if there's a trail of victims where ASIC has failed to do its job, and the other thing I've learned recently is in the last 9 months is where ASIC has dropped a nuclear bomb on the wrong target. And you think to yourself, well, because Senator Bragg, who I've spoken to a few times, he's very focused on what I am about ASIC not doing its job, but sometimes they go too aggressive on the wrong target and they screw the case up. And there's a whole class of cases that before the inquiry there. So we basically write the report, 27th of October, ASIC, so the Senate votes 43-20 to establish the Bragg inquiry at the Senate Economic References Committee. Labor establishes a separate inquiry at the PJC, Parliamentary Joint Committee on Corporation and Financial Services. And here we are in the process of going through this process of 170 submissions, lots of private, a lot of people have put in submissions that have been treated as correspondence because of certain allegations that were made, etc. But the inquiry the senators have heard enough for them to, and the reason why we got the inquiry in the first place, I mean, think about it. You have the Coalition of Greens, One Nation, Jackie Lambie's party, Senator Pocock, all voting for an inquiry where Labor says, no, we want an ASIC. But if you put those two inquiries together, this is universal concern about ASIC in the Senate. Why is that? Because they know something is wrong. Because when the Sterling issue happens, the politicians hear about it.
They get contacted by the victims, yeah.
Absolutely. And they say, well, we don't want this trail of failure because time and again, whether it's the reviews, inquiries, the Royal Commission, there is something systemically wrong at ASIC. And the thing I've learned in this process is you have people at ASIC in early October saying, we have to be seen to treat John Adams in his report more seriously than he deserves. It's like there's a mentality at ASIC that if you're from a regional place like Wollongong, you have no right to criticise the government. You're too stupid to know whether ASIC can do a good job or not. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I mean, I've worked in Parliament, I've worked in the public service, I've worked at a Big Four accounting firm. I'm no dummy, and it's high time we actually really put ASIC to the test in terms of are they doing an effective job that the Parliament has set them to do, or are they screwing it up? And the more you dig into this, so we have a show coming out this afternoon on the interest of people. We have the bombshell smoking gun email where Joseph Longo orders the manipulation of Parliament on the morning of the vote to take this away from Senator Bragg, to narrow the terms of reference. We have some other big scandals coming up in the mainstream media. That one story that we can't talk about yet, that hopefully the Australian is going to go to print. That's something I came across in the last few months. But there is something, and again, I don't think it's just incompetence. I think there is something systematically rotten. And you look at these people being paid, Joseph Longo on a package of $823,000, pushing ESG, which is the World Economic Forum framework for radical...
Environmental social governance.
Yeah, so the radical climate change and the radical transgender sort of campaigns that are being run. This is ESG on steroids. And Longo is pushing the World Economic Forum agenda in on 823. You got Chester and Sarah Court on $650,000 a year. And you think, though, these people are being paid, I mean, backbench senators are being paid $210,000, which is a lot compared to the Joe public. But these people are being paid 2 or 3 times members of Parliament. And what do they produce of value to the society? Very little. And
the problem is they probably see themselves as the poor cousins of bankers, right, rather than see themselves as public defenders. But I want to unpack a few things. We've covered a lot just there. Just back to your unique approach that got you the investigation, and why my argument from that, which you, as far as I'm concerned, confirmed to me, is it shouldn't be this hard. Let me compliment you. I don't do that often. No, John Adams is very, very good because of your experience in government and just the way you think in actually translating political thoughts into action and knowing what it takes to do that. In this case, it wasn't the usual political action, it was actually getting government regulated to do its job. But I would say because I saw the package. You handed it to them on a platter. You did most of the investigation for them. And so where the average financial victim could never hope to do what you did in a million years, I'm absolutely certain of that. They shouldn't have to, because the mindset of ASIC should be your mindset. Give us what we need to know to be suspicious about. We will shake the trees. We will do the investigation. We will find the law that are broken.
But the interesting thing on that point is that the Section 13 of the Act says if ASIC has reason to suspect, it can start an investigation. Now, what does that mean in practice? 65% of complaints are knocked back from the public on a lack of evidence. And one of the challenges I had when I'm going through this process, and I've got my team instructing me about ASIC's internal assessment criteria, is ASIC doesn't tell you how much evidence, or they don't tell you how much evidence is enough, the form of the evidence, what they're looking for, and there's no instruction. It is so opaque in the black box, and it's like, well, because it's a lack of guidance, even the unsophisticated financial victim would have no idea what does ASIC want to see. So they put something very superficial and incomplete, and that gives ASIC an easy excuse to say we're rejecting a lack of evidence. But when you go to the efforts that I have, and my barrister, Niall Coburn, has basically said in his 35-year career, he's never seen anything like the package. He goes, my frustration is when I you think about it, you spend 9 months, around the clock, 7 days, $50,000, you walk into ASIC, and it was a very surreal experience that day, because I had no idea whether this was enough, because ASIC didn't say this is what we want. And this was just a stab in the dark. Is this enough to get ASIC to commence a formal criminal investigation or not? And like I said, 2 out of 3 assessors said it's not our job, it should go to someone else. And then the third assessor said, no, we should do this.
You know what you did? You actually, given that this is an agency, as we've just discussed, that looked for excuses not to investigate, you gave them something that took away all their excuses. You gave them an investigation they couldn't refuse.
That's right.
That's what you did. Whereas most people don't think the system works that way. They think, and you quoted Niall Coburn. Niall Coburn gave testimony to the Sterling inquiry, and he made the point there, which I thought was entirely right, that ASIC, the fact that these were elderly, unsophisticated, vulnerable people, should have been enough for ASIC to go the extra mile without having a whole heap of evidence in front of them. Just think, hang on, there's a question over this class of investors, though they're not investors. Anyway, there's a question over this class of person. We're going to have to act proactively here. That was his mentality, who used to be an ASIC investigator.
That's right.
A very good one. And now it's not there. The evidence indicates it's not there anymore. This agency has become dysfunctional.
And can I just say one thing? So even though I've produced, because I ended up doing 2 volumes of this report on the 6th of October 24 of October, because there was a new annual report that came out, so we updated the numbers. So I used their numbers to say this is ASIC's story. Because it's not the story that ASIC wants in the public, they attack the integrity of the report internally. They didn't do it externally. But because I wrote to Stephen Jones, I wrote to Jim Chalmers, I sent it to the Financial Systems Division within the Treasury in Canberra. I said, this is my report. I've called for an inquiry. I want you to assess it. Check the numbers. So Treasury did. And Treasury's assessment by 2 people inside Treasury, this is substantially correct. So when you have serious people at Treasury saying, no, the John Adams report is technically sound. And when I get to testify, and hopefully the Citizens Party will testify at the inquiry later this year, I'll be saying the debate's over. There is no question of systemic operational decline at ASIC, because the numbers say it. Treasury's checked the numbers are the numbers. ASIC has, up until this point, they have had multiple opportunities to explain the trends in the graphs. They can't. And that's why, in my view, people like Warren Day, who's the now new chief executive officer of ASIC, he should go, because it's his job to ensure that he can run ASIC effectively. But if it's declining in performance, he should be able to explain why. And when I met him on the 8th of September, he can't. And that's why I'm thinking, well, because again, the excuse is resources. Some people say structure. those are important factors. But the essence of, if we say, where do we want this inquiry to result in, it's leadership, it's culture. The leadership is being, there's too many people there, been there too long. I don't think they're doing a good job. I think the incompetence, if not malfeasance, in some parts of ASIC permeates from the top, and we need a wholesale change at the top. And to be honest, the only way this happens is Parliament putting its foot down and saying, we pass the laws, we appropriate the money to ASIC, they're there to do our bidding as Parliament. It's not good enough, we want more. And the frustrating thing for us politically is, before the election, Labor was all gung-ho.
I was going to ask you about that.
Labor was all gung-ho about fixing ASIC. And now after the election, Stephen Jones has gone quiet.
You engaged Labor in good faith, though, in the lead up to your report, including with your report.
Yes.
You got some good feedback from Labor senators.
That's right.
But when push came to shove for an inquiry, so let's just describe that process. Because we ended up with 2 inquiries,
Yes.
but one of them is this lame duck that's just doing nothing. So what does that tell you is going on behind the scenes in Labor?
Well, I mean, the thing is that, so correct. I met Senator Pratt, Senator O'Neill, a bunch of other senators in August of 2022. They all articulated, the need to fix ASIC. They were very interested in the trends.
Senator Pratt had been both of them had been involved in the Sterling inquiry. Senator Pratt especially.
Exactly. And Senator Pratt was very astute in saying, we've inherited this problem from the coalition. If we don't fix this, this is going to be on Labor's watch. This is going to be our problem. So if there is an issue with performance, we should get on with it. So that's what they said to me in August. By October, on the 13th of October, I get a letter from Senator O'Neill basically saying we don't agree with an inquiry because we have existing processes at the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Corporation and Financial Services, and we don't need an extra process. Now, the reason why we need an extra process is because the existing committee hearings that the PJC has doesn't allow for the public
to make submissions.
To make submission. That was one of the key differences. But yeah, initially it was great. Then they went cold. Then when Senator Bragg, the day after the budget, puts it on the Senate notice paper in October, say, well, I'm calling for an inquiry, Labor flips, and then on the morning of the 27th, they establish the inquiry at the PJC, and then they go into, Senator O'Neill goes into the chamber and says, we don't need the Bragg inquiry because we've already established inquiry. Now, the Senate didn't buy the BS because I think they could see through it. And then they got up. So what has the Labor done and the PJC done since October? Zip. The inquiry has done nothing, and the inquiry's gone nowhere. And so that's so Labor, I think, has a lot to answer for. And again, this is where people say I'm nuts when I say, is it possible that my package and the PM's intervention, has that had any influence over Labor's position on ASIC? Is there some sort of inside deal between Labor and ASIC? We'll protect you if you protect us. Now...
Well, your FOIs have revealed other examples of a relationship between ASIC and Labor members of Parliament. Well, we think they're Labor members of Parliament, presumably they are, where ASIC has tried to influence parliamentary procedures.
That's right.
In relation to your package and your report.
In terms of the report and the inquiry. So absolutely. So as we go forward in this process, now again, Joseph Longo gave an opening address at the 23rd of June public hearing, said, we reject the interim report, we reject any criticism, we reject any suggestion we're a weak corporate regulator, we are effective, we do the job that we are required to do, we do it well. I think as we get into the second half of this year, we're going to hear numerous witnesses who will say to Parliament something very different to ASIC's public position. And then the political question is to Labor, why have you gone cold? Is there an inside deal? Is it not? But there can be no question that something major reform has to happen at ASIC, and obviously Labor is not shy about reform because they did the RBA review. And even though you and I may have criticisms about that review, they did a review, they got rid of the governor, they made some structural changes, and they think that the sins of Philip Lowe have somehow been corrected in this reform process on the RBA. Well, where's the reform process on ASIC? I will not accept Labor saying there is nothing to see here. But I suspect...
Well, a journalist told you that the relevant Labor minister said, essentially, there's nothing to see here.
Yes. There was a journalist at Aussie's Cafe in Parliament speaking to Stephen Jones, the Minister for Financial Services, and the minister says, "I have no beef with ASIC." And I'm thinking to myself, after everything we've been able to expose, and after and this is the and again, you've been in politics longer than I have because you're older than me. Why is it that Labor is protecting ASIC for ASIC's behaviour while the coalition was in power
for 9 years? Yeah.
I mean, this is the biggest political power. You know what I think you should do?
Well, it's the reason we're not one of the major parties, mate, because it's a paradox in one level, but for us it's not, because we've always considered them to be two, wings of the same bird.
Well, sure, but the ironic thing is that you got Senator Bragg attacking ASIC for their behaviour under the coalition, and Labor is protecting ASIC for their behaviour under the coalition. And then politically, this makes no sense. This is completely inconsistent with what Labor was telling me in terms of August in 2022. And there is something more that is happening at ASIC which we haven't been able to understand. But the big thing is that I put out a tweet this afternoon is I met a journalist today in Melbourne who has been writing about ASIC and this whole situation. And again, the ASIC's media team has approached people in the newspapers and said, we want to talk to you about John Adams. We want to provide a counter narrative because this guy's a nutcase. And it's like, well, what is actually nuts? If the package triggered a formal investigation because there is something serious wrong here, if my independent report has been validated by the Treasury and the Senate is of the view that this warrants an inquiry, what have I actually done that is crazy? Because so far, a lot of people are actually agreeing with what I'm doing. Now, I don't play by the rules of corporate etiquette. I have a very different approach to going about communicating and actually getting the system to work in a particular way. But just because I have an unconventional approach, that shouldn't give ASIC license to go around Melbourne saying I'm a nutcase. Because so far, look, and again, this is your opportunity to tell your audience, have I done something in the last 2 years related to ASIC which would give any credence to that I'm mentally unstable?
Not related to ASIC.
No, not related to ASIC. Other topics maybe, but not related to ASIC.
No. I think this is like you can compare it to asymmetric warfare, where the enemy can't see the guerrilla tactics coming. Right? You are unconventional. You're coming at it from ASICs from their blind spot. Financial victims, they tend to treat them in a certain way because one, they're usually unsophisticated, usually bankrupt, poor bastards. Usually they can dismiss them as whiners even, right? You're actually taking up a case that they don't understand because they gave you your investigation, yes. Right? This is not of direct personal benefit for you, what you're waging here, but you're also very skillful at needling in the soft spots, right? And they don't like that. And so you're getting this kind of pushback. So take it as a badge of honour. If ASIC's calling you a nutcase, I'd make a T-shirt out of it.
The only thing I'll say, Robbie, is when you talk about unconventional tactics, who was the master of the element of surprise? Napoleon.
Go see the movie. Now, let's say, okay, big question mark over Labor, but we do have an inquiry that you've mentioned, Bragg. Give whatever you don't have to say everything, but give people your sense of how Bragg is approaching this inquiry, his level of sincerity, and what do you think has been achieved so far?
Well, the only thing, and again, just for the record, I used to be a member of the Liberal Party. Yeah. I used to be invited to the coalition. I quit the Liberal Party in 2016, so I'm independent. And the reason why we get on so well is that there are areas where we agree. There are areas where we disagree, but for my attitude is where we can form a coalition around an issue and we can actually do something productive, our disagreements shouldn't interrupt that in terms of that productive work. So the things I'm about to say to Senator Bragg, this is not about I'm a Liberal Party sycophant or anything like that. But no, the one thing I'll say is Senator Bragg's in private is the same as Senator Bragg in public. He has issued press releases against ASIC which perhaps are unparalleled in the history of the Senate about how aggressive
agree.
he is. He says it's a sick organisation. He said he's going to refer ASIC to the Privileges Committee for manipulating the Senate. He is super aggressive in public, which is very unconventional for an Australian senator to speak like this. I think. I mean, if Longo and ASIC has been shocked by me, I think they're even more shocked than an Australian senator would be like that. But the one thing I can say is that in private, he is as equally concerned about ASIC's performance and culture compared to his public statement. So there is some consistency there. So I think that's a positive thing. And obviously now we hear on the grapevine that as we move into the second half of 2023, there's going to be a series of public hearings related to different themes, because these are wide terms of reference, and there'll be a theme around investigations, a theme around timeliness, a theme around the handling of reports of alleged misconduct, the law structure, things like that.
And he's expanded it to include PwC now.
And PwC, etc. So we're now waiting to hear what the hearing schedule is going to look like, who's going to be called to testify, where those hearings will be, and that's when I think we're going to start to see a very different narrative compared to the narrative that ASIC put out. But I will say that tomorrow at 12 o'clock is a seminal moment in this process, is because in the interim report, the committee universally, by the way, criticised ASIC because they have not been forthwith with producing the required answers and information that the inquiry requires. Now, the committee has basically passed two recommendations endorsed by the Senate, and they said at midday on the 18th of July, which is tomorrow, ASIC must come forward with the information required through the Minister representing the Treasurer in the Senate, and if they don't, there will be a debate on the 2nd of August as to why did ASIC and the Minister fail to adhere to the orders of the Senate. So now here's the thing, ASIC's already said, well, we're not going to provide you with everything. So there's obviously institutional resistance, but it's going to be very interesting to see what information is revealed to the inquiry this week, and then what's going to happen on the 2nd of August. But given this bombshell about Longo giving the order to manipulate the Senate, I suspect we're going to see an automatic referral of ASIC to the Privileges Committee, and even people who used to work at ASIC at the most highest of levels think this is a very unprecedented situation, that ASIC is going to be before the Privileges Committee, and there'll be an investigation as to their behaviour.
And you're someone who has long called for the Parliament to use its powers under the Privilege Committee more aggressively against people and witnesses and institutions in these hearings who think they can treat Parliament with contempt.
One of the biggest problems in Canberra is repeated lying to the Parliament. And public servants writ large feel they have licence to provide incomplete answers or complete out-and-out lies because there is no consequences to lying. Look, unlike in the Congress in the US, where they will put people in jail if you lie to Congress. In this case, even though it's an offence, even though it's a breach of privilege, the Senate has done nothing. Now, there is a case, and we've had a bit of a chuckle about this, that in 1955, one time in 120 years of Australian federal history, where the House of Representatives put two people in jail for 3 months for now this was contempt. This is a breach of privilege, because a journalist and a businessman blackmailed a member of Parliament, a Labor member, and then the Menzies government in the House said that we will not tolerate this, and they put him in jail. Now, my strong contention is, if it goes to the Privileges Committee, if the committee says ASIC is guilty of manipulating democracy, I personally would like to see some sort of trial in the Senate, and if the Senate so wishes, convict and put someone in jail, because this I've had people who we know in Parliament says, even though this is constitutional, because in 1955 this went to the High Court, and the High Court said that the Parliament has these powers dating back to the 15th century. So even though it's constitutional, even though there is precedence, it is a radical move. But I think in this case, if we are going to turn the tide on ASIC, the Senate has to do something extreme and radical for ASIC to realise this time it's not the same, because we've had the same runaround story. I mean, you guys with the alert do article after article every year about financial victims, about MISs, about the scale of the damage, and I think it's fair to say you guys would like to stop writing about that topic and write about other things. And the only way you're going to stop writing about it is if we get genuine reform at ASIC.
Yeah, the only way you'll stop financial predators in Australia is if ASIC actually does its job as the tough cop on the beat and makes an example of some of them. People should go to jail. And the only way the Senate and Parliament will stop getting the runaround in these hearings if they make an example of a few people.
That's right.
And use the privileges power against them. I mean, we did that other inquiry as well into Australia Post, and the final report of that talked about the then chairman of Australia Post misleading the hearings, and whether that would be referred to the Privileges Committee. But nothing's happened.
That's right.
Right? So someone's got to step in and say, no, this is a systemic problem, we've got to intervene here. There's about an hour, sorry, we've gone for an hour. There's about a year left on this inquiry. Mm-hmm. So what outcome would you like to see?
Well, the thing is that I mean, at the end of the day, I think heads need to roll. And again, it's not just the commission; it's the executive leaders who have been there for 10 to 15 to 20 years. We need new leaders at ASIC. We need a complete clean out. I mean, I am concerned about some of the behaviour that I've come across, and there'll be some stories which we can't discuss today that are going to come out, which may give the idea that maybe we need to move beyond an inquiry of Parliament and we need a full-scale Royal Commission into ASIC and check some of the behaviour, conflicts of interest, other potentially corrupt behaviour at some of the most senior levels of this agency. And obviously because if I'm going to be 100% honest, and who knows, maybe ASIC is going to watch this when you put this air. If I'm going to be completely honest, Robbie, if you were to ask me, even though they are investigating my package, do I trust ASIC? Do I think they have enough professionalism and integrity to do a professional, independent job? With everything that I've seen, and the one thing I will say is that as we've gone through this inquiry process, I've had the chance to speak to about 30 people who are involved in the inquiry. I've got to look at ASIC's portfolio of cases across a whole range of different situations. And there's just so much that has gone wrong at ASIC. I just have I literally have no confidence in their professionalism, their competence, their integrity, and it's going to take a lot for me to say, I now trust them.
And can I say, you mentioned the War for Woy Woy, which was about a year ago. Since then, there have been numerous other shows on the Sunday night programs of Channel 7 and Channel 9, like 60 Minutes and the Spotlight program,
yes, that's right,
on different financial scandals. And the thing, without fail, every story that's to do with a financial scandal, ASIC will come up, and it's a universal criticism of ASIC just doing nothing.
And can I say tonight on Four Corners, another so something to do with the building industry, but and again, I haven't seen the promo, but people, I had a phone call today and saying this is another attack. Stephen Long running this one at ABC, another attack on ASIC for failure on this particular case study.
Yeah, I'd say, speaking on behalf of the Citizens Party, what we want to achieve out of this inquiry is a total rethink of how this kind of financial regulation should work, because we've identified in our writings they adopted a new philosophy back in 1998 with the Wallace inquiry, and it was the efficient markets hypothesis, which basically is, in this regard, markets are self-correcting, and it was the idea of caveat emptor, let the buyer beware, which I think is a great way for people to live their lives personally, but it's not a way for law enforcement to enforce the law. And it's interesting that when Scott Morrison was trying to deflect from the Royal Commission, and he came up with these roadblocks to the Royal Commission. One was AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, and then he talked about beefing up the powers of ASIC as well, and he called ASIC the tough cop on the beat, right? Even though Mr. Scott Morrison was Mr. Caveat emptor himself, he described it as a tough cop on the beat. So our attitude is, if that's what they're supposed to be it. Be a cop actively enforcing the law. Don't be this kind of standoffish fake regulator that says, oh, the markets will take care of themselves and the financial victims can be their own warning to each other, because that doesn't work. We've had 20 years, 30 years probably, of a carnage among ordinary mums and dads in Australia, thanks to this regulator. And we had a Royal Commission where people thought maybe this is being addressed, but instead of addressing it, COVID came along, the subject changed. I would argue that James Shipton, then head of ASIC, probably had good intention to address it. We'll see more about that in the future probably, but they got rid of him. Joe Longo is in place, and everything we've seen under Joe Longo and the management that you've been complaining about is an ASIC that's committed to not lifting its game on behalf of the people of Australia.
Yes.
That's what the Citizens Party is involved in this, because we want that to change and people to look at the big picture of what should be, all the aspects that should be looked at.
Perhaps one final thought as we wrap up, Robbie, is tough cop on the beat is one thing, enforcing the law is one thing, but before you get to those things, you need to be an aggressive investigator. And the core essence of my report is ASIC's propensity to investigate has declined. And why is that? Because, and having gone through the exercise myself, each case is unique. The evidence is unique. Your ability to assemble the evidence is in terms of unique. I mean, sometimes you think you're in a dead end, and sometimes something just falls in your lap, and it just starts to fit together. So I'm sympathetic of not because, for example, Senator Bragg has talked about ASIC's ability to achieve prosecutions. I haven't focused on that because I'm very sensitive to case-specific material situations, but you have to have an aggressive investigator, someone willing to at least ask the question, what's going on here? And then if you have good investigators who are aggressive to investigate, then you can at least trust the system that if they find something wrong, they will then investigate the law. But if there's not an aggressive investigative culture with good processes, the enforcing of the law, the tough cop and beat will never happen.
Yeah. No, I agree. So we've got an inquiry running for 12 more months or 11 more months or whatever it is now. Stay engaged, people. Stay in tune with, John's got a couple of channels now. Interest of the People with Martin and the Public Defender.
The Public Crusader.
The Public Crusader. But it's good he comes onto our show every now and then because you get to see his face.
That's right.
All right, John, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you,
for
Robbie.
Citizens Insight again. Welcome to Melbourne. Enjoy your stay. Thanks to the viewer for watching. Like I said, stay engaged with the inquiry and look for any updates where sometimes we might tell you how you can engage even more, making extra submissions, doing that sort of thing. And let's make sure we see this through to the end and make it the best inquiry it can be. So thanks for tuning in, and stay tuned for more episodes in the future of Citizens Insight.